his recent tirades.
Hindi na tayo suspend ng time na makipag-away sa ibang kandidato kasi yung laban na to is more than all of us combined.
A percentage of voters who prefer presidential candidate Bongbong Marcos can still change their minds, according to the Octa Research Group.
One can argue that VP Lenny's numbers have improved since February, but the improvement, while significant, seemingly at this point it has not bridged the gap.
One political analyst believes that presidential bet Isko Moreno miscalculated his actions at the Manila Peninsula press conference on Easter Sunday.
Those who are supporting the mayor some of them have already become disgusted and they do not want to vote for him anymore. So I think it's a miscalculation on his part.
Presidential aspirants continue to assemble their crowds in political rallies as the campaign is approaching the final stage. Will the frontrunner maintain his lead, or will there be any last-minute surge from any other contender? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. We will be joined by our guests and the other chiefs when we return. Welcome to the Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay at kasama po natin Ami Pamintuan joining us online from the Philippine Star at the port area in Manila. Ami, mukhang tayong dalawa muna.
Oo nga eh.
But later on, Ed Lingga will join us here in studio in Mandaluyong. In the meantime, Ami, ano bang binabantay? Anong headline bukas?
Well, walang masyadong ano ngayon, kundi yung gulo pa rin, no? Doon sa provincial buses. Anyway, nag-field na sila ng mga buses to transport people. Papunta doon sa mga terminals talaga para makalabas naman yung mga gusto ng pumuntang probinsya. Pero hanggang ngayon, nagtuturoan pa rin eh.
Oo nga, nagtuturuan. In the meantime, LTFRB is saying they want to issue some show-cause orders against some bus companies. Ano ba talaga yung ibang mga moving parts dyan? Saan ba talaga nagkakagulo?
Eh, sabi ng mga bus company, sumusunod lang naman daw sila dun sa ban, no? Yung may hours sila na hindi pwedeng pumunta dun eh. Eh, yung tao, syempre, nahihirapan silang magpunta pa dun sa ilan lang naman kasi yung designated na terminals during the closed hours. So, ayun, padala na lang ng mga buses to transport them.
Talagang magulo, talagang masalimuot. Dito lang tayo sa maayos, politiko na lang, para walang gulo.
Para sa mas magulo.
Para mas madali pag-usapan. Okay, let's bring in our guest tonight. Joining us, former presidential spokesperson, Attorney Edwin Lacerda, political advisor Ronald Llamas, and political science professor Dennis Coronacion of the University of Santo Tomas. Gentlemen, good evening. Welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening. Good evening, Ami. Good evening, Robbie.
Sino kanino? Parang nakamute pa po kayo, Mr. Llamas. Yan. Si Mr. Llamas, style estudyante lang sa online class, ano? Kunwari mute, pag tinawag, biglang nag-blank yung screen. Mr. Llamas, can you hear us? Okay, ayan, naririnig na po tayo.
Good evening, Robbie. Good evening, Ami.
Dahil huli kayong pumindot sa buzzer, una kayo sa tanong. Let's get one thing out of the way first. Itong, para let's clear the table. This has been hanging for a while, but now we got some resolution to it. The COMELEC decision finally dismissing that one final case, again, at least at their level, no? Against Bongbong Marcos. Does this still factor in any way in this home stretch of the elections? And what do you make of it?
Well, una ay mukhang hindi pa naman final yun eh. Dahil yung na-dismiss yata yung sa division, yung kila Christian Monsod. So mukhang baka mag-appeal pa sila sa NBank, mag-file ng motion for reconsideration. Kalawa, meron pa natitira, yung sa Akbayan. Yung Akbayan Party ay meron silang disqualification case at nag-motion for reconsideration sila sa NBank.
Okay.
So actually, baka dalawa pa yung natitira. Itong sinasabi na with finality na mukhang hindi pa naman. At saka yung natitira sa Akbayan.
But I guess
whether...
Go ahead, sorry.
Whether magkakaroon siya ng epekto ay I doubt it, no? Mukhang pa na lang to eh. Mga proseso na lang na tinatapos, no? Mukhang may decision na yung COMELEC, no? Tungkol diyan. May mga lumalabas na mga conspiracy theory na dinedelayan dahil baka after election yung president-elect i-disqualify. Pero tingin ko ay walang basihan yung mga conspiracy theories na yan.
And like we said, we just wanted to get that out of the way because obviously the big context right now are the numbers in the surveys, as well as we'll see what numbers still come out in the big rallies being planned for any and all candidates in the coming days. But Professor Tayaw, what other narratives do you see actually emerging other than the fact that Bongbong Marcos has a very big, intimidating lead heading into these final 2 weeks?
Well, I don't think that there's going to be, a new narrative, in the remaining days of the campaign period. So sa tingin ko, at least between VP Leni Robredo and the BBM, I think they're going to stick with their narratives, with their respective narratives. Ang medyo nagbabago lang itong kay Isko Moreno, no. It was a surprise yung nangyari nung weekend na ang kanyang pinupuntiryan na ay si VP Leni Robredo. Now that was definitely a surprise for some of us. So hindi natin alam kung bakit. Well, of course, ano yan, palaisipan yan sa mga political analyst kung bakit niya ginagawa.
Well, actually, sinabi niya kasalanan daw namin sa media kasi yun ang focus ng
Lagi nyo kasalanan. Laging kasalanan ng media.
Takbo daw nung anong yon, nung press conference na yon. Pero balikan ko muna yung sa ruling ng COMELEC on Bongbong Marcos, no? You don't think it has any impact on the campaign of Leni Robredo? Na halimbawa sa funding, di ba kailangan yung mga funding, final stretch ng campaign, kailangan yan eh. Di ba madagdagan kaya yung suporta pa lalo ni Bongbong Marcos because of the ruling?
I mean, the disqualification, yes, no. I mean, it's really it's a victory for Senator Marcos. So therefore, they will really crow about it. But tama sabi ni Ronald, it's really at this point in time, from a political angle, it would be only 2 weeks to go. So it would appear na parang you're robbing the people of their choice, no? It wasn't unlike 2016 where the decision on Grace Poe, Senator Grace Poe, was done much earlier. The resolution was done so early that there was time for people to for the Supreme Court to rule on it. This time around, en banc pa, wala pang en banc, division pa lang, so it has to go through the process. And so either way, it's nasa balota na rin si Bongbong Marcos. So, and if he's disqualified, pwede naman siya may substitution, di ba? So parang hindi na rin, hayaan na lang natin kung let it run, because it will appear like we're manipulating naman, I mean, yung election. I'd rather that we go on a fight, but certainly if COMELEC or the Supreme Court would rule within these two weeks, which is quite an impossibility, then it's really labanan na talaga yan sa election.
But your campaign, of course, your campaign is working on the assumption na tuloy-tuloy yung Bongbong Marcos bid, no?
That's correct. I mean, at this stage, with 17 days to the last day of the campaign is May 7, it's really quite an impossibility given the judicial process that we're going to go through, the quasi-judicial right now before the COMELEC, and then it moves up to a judicial process in Supreme Court. They're not going to rule in 2 weeks' time. That's an impossibility.
Yeah, Professor Coronacion, and I do apologize. I realize I called you the wrong name kanina. Professor Coronacion, and also Mr. Llamas, give us an insight on what goes on in the campaigns in this final stretch. You have 2 weeks, especially now. The numbers, like I said, seem to be firming up. I know different campaigns will say, hindi, meron pa rin yung mga angulo dyan. But with 2 weeks to go, what's happening in the background? What's happening in the campaigns and in the different machineries?
Well, kung makikita naman natin yung campaign ni Bongbong, mukhang ipagpapatuloy nila yung strategy nila na message discipline, no talk, no mistake. Hindi nga less talk, less mistake. No talk, no mistake. No? Parating yung last COMELEC debate, I'm almost sure hindi siya dadalo dyan. So medyo historic ito, no? First time na may presidential candidate na hindi man lang dadalo ni minsan sa isang presidential debate. At tingin ko magpapatuloy yon, no, yung kanilang klaseng message discipline na yan, no. Dun sa kampo ni Vice President Robredo, tingin ko ay pupuruhan nila yung tinatawag nilang surge or momentum, yung malalaki nilang mga demonstration, yung volunteers na nagdo-door to door nitong nakaraang buwan. Tingin ko doon sila magfo-focus, no? I doubt kung merong substantial changes sa narrative. It will be more organizational. Yung iba naman, like si Isko Moreno, mukhang ang direction niya ay disruption. Dahil mukhang natanggap na niya na hindi naman magbabago within the next 2 weeks yung numbers niya. So baka sakaling magbago through disruption, no? Kaya nagpasabog siya last Sunday, no? Pangapat, yung iba, ang sinasabi nila, ang totoo namang survey yung election day eh. Kaya hintayin na lang natin. At yun nga yung sinabi ni Senator Ping Lacson, yun ang sinabi ni Manny Pacquiao, yun yung sinabi ng mga iba na hindi kami aatras, tuloy kami sa Mayo at yun yung tunay na survey. So, mukhang yun yung mga nag-unfold na direksyon ng mga kampanya.
Ay, Professor Coronation, if you agree na kay Bongbong Marcos, stay disciplined, no talk, no mistake, what about on the part of Leni Robredo? In particular, this is a candidate that has to keep talking. This is a candidate that has to keep showing up. In the meantime, as gaya nga ng sinabi, in the meantime, you now have somebody not only trying to disrupt, but really just targeting her. Isko Moreno, lahat ng patutsada ngayon is all about Leni Robredo. How does she stay disciplined? They've been trying to send the message, let's all stay positive as well. But now she's getting fires from different sides, and not to mention, it's not a centralized movement on her part. It's a quote-unquote a movement where people are also can be triggered outside of the official campaign. So how does she maintain that discipline?
Well, I think she has to strike a balance between talking and not talking at all. Since she's not the front runner in the surveys, I think she really has to talk a lot. Kaya nga lang when it comes to tirades coming from Isko Moreno, siguro hindi niya na dapat patulan yon. So she has to be selective when it comes to talking. So she really has to talk because she has to catch up with the numbers of Bongbong Marcos. And as much as possible, given the limited amount of time, she needs to narrow the gap. She needs to close the gap, and hopefully, from on her part, she could snatch a victory.
That's a formidable gap, no? And you were talking about possibilities. Apart from no talk, no mistake, the Marcos camp is also flooding social media with a lot of information, a lot of campaigning. You know, mapapanood mo siya on TV. We will build more hospitals. Ganon. How do you counter that? Yung camp ni Mr. Dashard.
Ami, it's really there are always two aspects in the campaign, the ground war and the air war. No? From the ground war aspect, like what Ronald already mentioned, there's going to be a lot of rallies on the vote-rich provinces. For instance, today she is in Cebu, so there will be going to a lot of the vote-rich provinces and be holding rallies. For instance, in Saturday there'll be a huge rally also here in NCR. So you're looking at the ground war where there is a surge in her numbers. There's also a surge in people coming to her, and you've seen that wherever there's a rally, the numbers of those particular jurisdictions really go up, and that's been proven in the surveys. On the other aspect of the ground war is the house-to-house campaign, and this is the first time, as we mentioned, that the house-to-house campaign, which is a local phenomenon, has become a national phenomenon where the house-to-house is being waged also by volunteers nationwide. I mean, not just by local campaigning house-to-house for local politicians, but also for the national politicians. And I saw that last Easter Sunday, there were volunteers in our place where they were really doing house-to-house. That's the ground war, no? And that's going to increase the last few days. No? In the air war, you've got the final bandwagon ad which should be coming out. And I'm sure that they'll be showing the rallies, the surge. There are also a lot of the air war campaigning, that the ads of the rallies of Leni are also being translated also on social media. There's no point at this point to really the point here is to talk about the positive messaging of Leni, because she has done so much. I mean, you're gonna pull teeth if you're going to talk about Bongbong, which is really just not the important thing right now. People need to discover who Leni is. At this short time, we're going to emphasize more of the accomplishments and what Leni has done and what she can do as President of the Philippines.
Okay, we will continue our conversation, gentlemen. We just need to take a break, and then when we return, kasama na rin po natin si Ed Lingao. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. Welcome back, the Chiefs here on One News. Ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama pa rin po natin si Ami Pamituan. And now joining us here in studio, Ed Lingao of One News. Ed, welcome.
Happy Thursday.
So, ikaw na yung unang tanong dito sa segment na to.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Sorry I'm late, but let me start off with this. I kind of asked this of Ronald Llamas the other night, but I'd still like to get the feedback of the other guests. After yung Sunday press conference, where supposedly some supporters of those presidential votes may have jumped ship. A lot of people were assuming that they would jump ship in favor of Robredo. I mean, that's the assumption of a lot of people. But if you look at numbers of Okta research, dun sa hard versus soft voters, dun sa, in particular, yung supporters ng mga kandidato at kung kanino sila mas malambot at mas matigas, those votes coming from those presidential votes could just as well go to Bongbong Marcos and add to his numbers. What do you think? Do you see that, or is that a different equation altogether?
Well, based on the Okta survey, because of the second preference, it's possible that the votes can go to Bongbong. But a lot of the anecdotals, because alam mo, ang Pilipino may ugaling pabor sa underdog. You saw that last Sunday, a bunch of gentlemen hitting a candidate who wasn't even there, who wasn't supposed to be the topic of the conversation, and yet being ganged up by all these presidential votes and vice presidential votes, such that it created an underdog effect on the part of Vice President Leni Robredo. It is entirely possible that, notwithstanding the Okta second preference survey of the ISCO voters, a number of them felt sympathy and empathy for VP Leni Robredo, and anecdotally, we've seen a number of voters who've decided to go for Leni Robredo as well. So we won't be able to determine with certainty where the votes of ISCO would go, the voters of ISCO would go, but definitely we've seen some shifting in the numbers of preference of ISCO voters towards Leni, also notwithstanding the Okta survey.
Mm-hmm. But before we go to Professor Dennis, Attorney Leceta, pero a lot of people would also say na yung Duterte DNA is more with ISCO, and if you follow that logic, those who may leave ISCO's camp or fence may end up jumping over to the other Duterte. I mean, if you go by the logic.
Well, that's correct. In fact, in one of the analyses why there was a huge number in Leni's votes in 2016 of the 14 million, I think there was an analysis where about 1.5 million or 2 million votes came from the Robredo camp. So there was a preference for Leni Robredo in 2016 as vice. No? Those same voters, since the president has no administration candidate, with the exception of Sara Duterte, then there's also a possibility that those voters who voted for during the vice presidential elections would also opt for her, considering that the president has no administration candidate. And in fact, he has made mention of some instances where he, without naming names, seemed to criticize Senator Bongbong Marcos as well.
See, Prof. Dennis and Ronald might want to also answer if they would prefer to.
I have to agree with Secretary Lasheda, in his observation that it's really quite difficult to predict as to whom the votes of those Isko Moreno supporters who got disappointed because of the turnout during the press con last weekend. So it's really quite difficult to predict as to whom votes are going to be filled. So mahirap sabihin yun eh. In fact, I can go to anyone. Any presidential candidate who was not around during the press con could benefit from the turnout of, from the disappointment that they felt with Isko Moreno. So mahirap masabi yun. Hindi natin masabi na kahit pasabihin natin na pareho yung hulma ni Isko Moreno kay Duterte, hindi pa rin natin masasabi kung ano ang takon ng mga tao, no?
See,
Ed,
Ronald.
baka, Ed?
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, baka magkaroon tayo ng konting indication sa last final survey end
Yes,
of the
that
month.
survey.
Dahil mukhang nagsisimula na yung survey period ng at least 2 dun sa mga survey firms ngayon or itong weekend at mangyayari yan after nung Sunday event. So medyo makakaroon tayo ng kaunting indications dun sa sagot sa katanungan mo, no? Pero kung i-deconstruct natin yung surveys after the filing last year, mukhang yung nag-aagawan ay yung kampo ni Leni Robredo at yung kampo ni Isko Moreno, no? Yung numbers ni Isko na bumagsak after the filing ay mukhang napunta kay Leni nung yan yung mga surveys after nung filing, no? At ito naman after nitong Sunday event, mukhang merong mga organizations na miyembro ng Aksyon Demokratiko ang lumipat dahil medyo na-frustrate sila. Ito yata yung Vice President nung Aksyon Demokratiko Youth. So, kung anecdotal, kung indicative, mukhang pumupunta doon sa binanatan ni Isko. Yung initial na mga voters or mga grupo na mismo nanggaling sa grupo ni Isko.
Okay. Gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'd like to change topic a bit. Still on the political surveys, but something we haven't really talked about a lot. Yung senatorial preferences. I'd like to ask Mr. Lacerda in particular. Again, you quoted Octa. We're all quoting Octa only because that's the latest numbers we have to go by. But if you go by the numbers there, Risa Ontiveros started somewhere in the middle of the pack of the top 12. Latest number shows she's at number 13, hanging on to 13, a statistical chance to get in. But the point is, kung malaglag si Risa, and unless you count yung mga guest, quote-unquote, guest candidates, di ba? But then why would you count Jojo Binay? And why would you count, for that matter, Mig Subiri, if I'm not mistaken, who's really now supporting BBM? So kung malaglag si Risa, is it fair to say that this would be basically a repeat of the debacle of 2019 as far as the opposition is concerned?
Well, it happens that we're not able to bring in anyone from the candidates of Lenny. That might very well happen. The problem kasi with the senatorial, it's really name recall there. If you notice, all the people. Look, your fellow radio personalities, Tulfo is doing very well there in number 1. So it's really all name recall. All the name recall with respect to the former politicians, Alan, Chis Escudero, all this. Practically, it's name recall. Unfortunately, there is still the concern about I suppose there's the administration still being popular has an effect on the candidates of Vice President Leni Robredo. So there is still that effect on not on frowning upon candidates of Leni. So that's a huge problem that needs to be reviewed. Even for instance, Senator Dick Gordon, who has gone with Leni, who's a politician not identified with Leni, except only in this particular campaign, is I think also suffered from suffer from that. So it's really more on iba ang chemistry, ang behavior sa sa senatorial compared to the presidential. So it's entirely possible what you're saying. Hopefully it doesn't happen. Hopefully Risa is able to go up further, and maybe we'll have one slot. But that's really. It was during our campaign, when we were in government, Ronald was in charge of the senatorial. So Ronald should be able to answer that. By the way,
Mr. Llamas, you've been voluntold.
Robbie, iba-iba kasi yung mga surveys halimbawa dun sa Pulse at saka Lilo, ay mukhang si Risa ay nasa labas ng 12. 13 or 14. Dun sa SWS tsaka sa Octa, mukhang pasok siya sa 12. tsaka sa publikus, no? So, iba-iba yung mga survey, pwede pagbatihan ano yung mas accurate, no? Kaya, ayun, pero mahirap talaga kung ikaw ay nag-iisang oposisyon sa top 12, no? At nandoon ka sa bingit. Sabi kasi nung iba, dahil yan yung vulnerable sa mga special operations. Kung ikaw ay isang oposisyon.
Will be safe on the if you're in the eighth spot. Normally, if you're on the eighth spot, then that's medyo safe na. But between 9 to 12, that's really a very precarious situation where you really need to. And the thing is, the last week, yung ground operations sa last week, that's where talagang may nangyayari doon. So that's really a challenge for Risa, considering that she has very limited resources.
Pero granted na, no? Go ahead, Ami.
Yung date niya for Vice President. Mas malayo yung gap doon between Kiko and Tito Soto. How are you working on his numbers?
Oh, admittedly, it's more formidable because you've got the only administration candidate, no? I mean, Sara Duterte is the administration candidate and her pull in Mindanao is really just huge. So even, in fact, even Bebot Alvarez endorse Lenny and endorse someone else, Tito Soto. So the challenge for Lenny for Kiko is really just is I think 2-3-fold more difficult. But again, we're campaigning on a tandem basis, and even if Lenny was endorsed separate from Kiko, she'd always say in the rallies that dalhin natin si Kiko Pangilinan, and to that extent, we will do our best to make sure that Kiko does better, and the House campaign has been emphasizing really Kiko's numbers, no? Kiko's involvement, and marami naman siya talagang nagawa. Senator Kiko has been very impressive in his Senate and also as a cabinet, especially focused on the agricultural sector. So, yun, mabigat talagang yung kalaban ni Tito Soto and si Sara Duterte.
Anong reaction niya dun sa mga pairings na halimbawa Lenny and Tito, mga ganon?
I think realistically, he's very pragmatic about it. Because ang kailangan rin naman natin manalo yung presidente. Everything rests on winning the presidency, and then the president can, whatever happens, she can help Kiko at some future time if she is president. So the main goal is really to win the presidency, and if we can bring in si Kiko and make sure that we campaign for Kiko better, no? But ito lang siguro yung tandem. Normally kasi Filipinos don't vote for tandem din, di ba? Very rare. Si Jeme at saka si De Castro lang ang no? Ngayon, baka this time around, it's a possibility BBM and Sara will be voted in as a tandem, but that remains to be seen.
Ed, may tanong kanina.
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Yan ang hirap pagka nanggagaling sa wag po eh.
Teka, alam nila kung
lahat sila na-guess mo na, kaya lahat sila naiintindihan.
Professor, what do you think they should do to improve their numbers? Kasi it's really an uphill battle, From your end, anong nakikita ninyo na pwede pang gawin into the home stretch?
Well, are we referring to the Lenny Robredo camp?
And Lenny and Kiko camp and their Senate slate.
Definitely, it's an uphill battle for both candidates, Pero I think between the two, mas mahirap ang kalagayan ni Vice Presidential candidate Kiko Pangilinan. Kasi nga, our elections allow split ticket voting pagdating sa position ng President and Vice President. So there may be, even though we are seeing a momentum in the campaign of VP Lenny Robredo, it doesn't mean that itong kanyang VP candidate ay ganun rin ang mangyayari. So it's an entirely different case. Kasi mayroon mga provinces ay may mga local leaders who would support Lenny only but do not want to support Kiko Pangilinan, for example. So yun ang mahirap doon. Kahit maging sabi natin catch up si Lenny Robredo in terms of the numbers, I don't think that it's going to translate into an increase also in the support of uh, her vice presidential candidate. So yun ang problema. So it's up to the camp of Leni Robredo and Kiko Pangilinan kung anong gagawin nila. I think they have done everything so far. And tama yung sinasabi ni Sir Lacerda na whenever ito si VP Leni Robredo, whenever she would campaign, she should always mention and she should always bring in itong si Vice Presidential candidate Kiko Pangilinan. So mahirap because of the nature of our campaigns. Our election. Talagang mahirap dalhin ng president yung kanyang vice president. There are also instances na mas nananalo pa yung vice president kaysa president. So it's a different scenario. Pero they both point out to the nature of our elections which allow split ticket voting.
Yeah.
Copy
Mr.
of-
Llamas, we've been asking this question, I mean, quite often, but now it becomes sharper and sharper with every election cycle. And by cycle, I mean every 3 years. But we've had about 3-4 election cycles where we keep asking about the power of social media. If you can go back to 4 election cycles and then compare it to how it is now, how much harder is it to campaign today?
Well, yun nga yung siguro na dapat nating tignan ngayon. Kung ang ating measurement are the traditional measurement, halimbawa yung traditional surveys, kung yung measurement natin ay yung mga endorsement from local officials, sabi nga nila, politics is basically local. At kung ang measurement natin ay yung usapin ng mga resources, no, ay talagang medyo mahirap na ma-bridge yung gap, yung lead ni Bongbong Marcos. Pero ang sinasabi naman ng iba, this is the first election na very dominant yung social media. Nagsimula yan noong 2016, pero ngayon talaga yung very pervasive yung social media. Na sabi nga nung isang columnist sa Philippine Star, si Andrew Marasigan, mukhang this is a battle between, kung pag-uusapan yung predictions, this is a battle between Google and the traditional surveys. No? So ang sinasabi niya, the jury is still out, even kung less than 3 weeks na lang yung natitira. Kaya inuulit ko, yung traditional measurements ay sinasabi na mahirap na. Pero kung ifa-factor in natin yung mga bagong elements dito sa election na ito, which is social media, sinasabi ng iba, teka, baka merong possible upset or baka merong possible disruption na mangyari dahil dito sa elephant in the room na sinasabi nila.
Pero Sir Ronald, if you go by that argument, by any measure, a lot of people would tell you that who dominates social media right now, which candidate now dominates social media, even if he, at least by appearances, does not pay for social media ads, di ba? Parang may umaangat na isang kandidato who is dominating social media. So even there, he would have the upper hand.
Mukhang bahagi ng social media ay talagang dominated ni Bongbong. Lalo na nauna siya. No? Nagsimula siya nung before 2016, nung tumakbo siya for Vice President. At nung natalo siya, ay nagpatuloy siya sa social media. At makikita nga natin yung lumalabas for the past 5 years ay yung laman ng kanyang social media is basically a revision of history. No? Kaya medyo nauna siya. Pero hindi lang naman ang social media, hindi lang naman Facebook eh. no? Hindi lang naman siya Instagram, no? Maraming elements
TikTok,
ngayon ang
malakas
social media.
Pero malakas din siya sa
Yeah.
TikTok. In fact, yung asaran
Yes.
nga, TikTok University ang, ang pinakamaraming graduate ngayon.
Yeah.
Pero the population kasi of the social media is really dominated by Facebook, eh. And Twitter is only about what? A little more than 10 million. Twitter is a little more than 10 million. TikTok is a little more than, maybe a little more than Twitter, no? But there is no, if I remember it right, there is no measurable analytics with TikTok, primarily because I think who owns it ba? The Chinese firm refuses to release their analytics. But ang klaro doon kasi sa Facebook and sa Google kasi sentiment agnostic, that's a problem.
Yes.
Why you cannot use Google
Yes.
in and of itself. Because if you look at the literature of the Google, even the FAQ of Google says we're not a campaign polling, cannot be used as a polling exercise. But I agree with Ronald that there seems to be a debate right now, owing to the fact that there are a number of reasons why there seem to be questioning the survey, primarily because also the density of the rallies of VP Lenny. You've never seen someone command 187,000 rally. I mean, traditionally you pack it at 10,000, 12,000, 20,000, malaki na yan. But right now you're seeing numbers beyond the traditional, and that's why people have been asking, why are the survey numbers still low, given notwithstanding the fact that there's a huge number the rallies. No, I have a different view of that, but basically that's where the debate is. And also, as what Ronald said, Google Trends, Facebook, YouTube, there's now a competition. But unfortunately, like what Ronald said also, BBM started early, and that's why if in case Bongbong wins, it dashes the basic premise that winning the presidency is destiny. This was years and years in the making and the planning. So you can't say that it was destiny for Senator Bongbong Marcos. It was really planned out if he wins. And that really describes this whole thing about destiny.
Professor Dennis, I asked about social media because on the other side of that coin, obviously, is mainstream and traditional media. And if you take in particular the narrative, I wanted to ask, therefore, we talked about social media, but what does this campaign essentially tell you about the influence, or if any of it remains, in mainstream media? Because if you take just the narrative of Bongbong Marcos, and let's not beat around the bush, the narrative and the coverage of traditional media of Bongbong Marcos is the same narrative as before. Magnanakaw ang pamilya, he's been caught lying about his credentials, mandarambong, convicted ang nanay, and so on. And the narrative on social media is diametrically opposed to that. And to your point, if he wins, it's that narrative, and therefore it's that social media that wins. Professor Coronation, what does that say about mainstream media?
Well, that's specifically the reason why BBM has been evading media interviews as well as debates that are organized by certain media outlets. Kasi ang tingin niya hindi friendly sa kanya yung traditional media. And this is because the reason why social media and the traditional media seem to have a different narrative or portrayal of BBM is that because each of these has a different dynamic. Meaning to say they work on different set of rules. Sa traditional media, you have this editorial board wherein all the information, the reports are going to be screened. Whereas in social media, the author of the information is free to say whatever he wants to say about himself. And mostly, yung information is favorable to his image. So, kaya nga lang, ang trend kasi ngayon is that I think when it comes to, political education and gathering political information, more and more people, especially sa election ngayon, are getting their information from social media. The traditional media continue to be relevant, except that when it comes to getting information, well as entertainment, I think na-overtake na ng social media yung traditional media. And the numbers show na as years go by, more and more Filipinos are resorting to social media when it comes to learning some things about Philippine politics. And that's the sad thing about it. Ang nakukuha nila ay biased information. O unlike in the traditional media, mayroong filtering na nangyayari.
Do you also see the possibility that his support base really doesn't care about the issues hurled against him? Kasi those issues have been around for 35 years. Di ba? Alam naman nila yan eh.
I mean, can I just say lang, no? To answer Robbie, the role of social media has, and no offense to traditional media, you've lost the game in terms of being the source of truth. It's because of the polarization. It's because no one has a monopoly on the truth anymore. That's why yung mga banat kay Bongbong doesn't hold sway anymore. Because because of the algorithm of social media, you only see what you want to see or want to read. And so you're being fed with all this. Let's say it's all about Bongbong Marcos. So you talk about banata mo ng banata, hindi na nakikita. Ang nakikita lang nila, ang sagot dun sa mga banat. So it reinforces what you already want to believe. And then it grows. And then since, as Ronald said, they've started since 2016, the echo chamber has just grown and expanded far more than perhaps the other candidates. And so it's a question, the monopoly of social media is based on how fast do you create your own echo chamber, how fast you expand your own source of truth. And that's why, alam na natin ang sagot sa mga sinabing golden year si Taliano Gold, and yet it doesn't seem to convince any other people because they're in their own echo chamber. And may handa na.
Tsaka may bagong element yung social media ngayon. Bago na nga yung social media, may bago pa siyang element, yung micro-messaging. So yung dating monopoly ng ground war, which is yung mga tinatawag nating ward leader system, ay nandun na rin sa air. May isang element ng ward leader system ngayon sa air war. At yan yung micro-messaging. Meron kang isang troll, isang tao na nag-aalaga ng 300 to 400 real accounts. No? Hindi lamang sa usapin ng news, fake or otherwise, kung hindi, inaalagaan talaga sila. Tinatanong yung kanilang problema sa mga pamilya, no? Pinapadalan sila minsan ng GCash, no? Sinasabi sa kanila na pwede kayong makakuha ng ginto pag manalo itong kandidatong ito, or makakakuha kayo ng ATM card. So meron ka ngayong ganong klaseng sistema, no, na pag-aalaga sa mga real account sa social media na dati ay ginagawa sa mga barangay at sa mga sitio. No? So, yung dati na ground war, no, yung dating ward leader system, nandun na rin ngayon sa air war, specifically sa social media. No? Yung tinatawag nating micro-messaging.
But how do you fight?
Kailangan mo ng malaking resources para gawin yan.
Yeah, but how do you fight that? Or if not fight it, how do you adapt to that?
Well,
Ronald, sige.
Edwin.
No, which is why that whole thing about the SIM card registration was important for us. Because you know, look, there are only two entities that can control social media. If you talk about the social media companies themselves, and they will not do it because it will affect their bottom line, or government. But since you don't trust government, you impute so much bad faith on government. Then who's gonna guard Facebook or social media? No one. If you don't trust government, there's no social media themselves will not police themselves because it's going to affect their bottom line. We've seen that in the United States. We've seen so many hearings on Facebook, on social media by the U.S. Congress, and yet, you know, there's no way to police them unless government intervenes and make sure that these things are stopped. But in our case, the president decided to veto it for some fiction of impairing constitutional rights of free expression and all that.
Mr. Laceda, unfortunately, you're going to open a can of worms for which we'll need another episode because
So
we have a lot
I understand, but there are
kasi,
only
I just want to be clear. I mean, I can't let that pass either. Di ba? Parang we'll just have to save it for another. But as far as I understand, it was vetoed not because of the SIM card registration, but because there was a rider that was inserted with regards to banning fake names in social media. That was the issue. And President Duterte, in my own opinion, was correct in vetoing that. Without that, I think public opinion had gotten to the point that they were willing to accept SIM card registration.
No, you're creating, you're registering, for instance, in the States, you can create pen names, you can create aliases for as long as you also register the name. Because you can't, because aliases are there.
Anyway, ganito na lang. We both agree. This is a can of worms and we're doing it at the tail end of the program. We'll have to calendar that for another conversation. Siguro, huling tanong na lang kay Professor Dennis. So, that's it. Parang in the final 2 weeks, what else should we be bracing for? Are we just basically now going with the flow and wherever this takes us in the next 2 weeks?
Well, I don't think that we're going to go with the flow. I don't think that the result has been predetermined already. What I think is that since all the presidential candidates are working very hard, both as mentioned by Sir Edwin, in the air war and in the ground war, I think that the expected result of the election, the presidential election, might still be subject to change. Depende yan sa magiging efforts ng ating mga kandidato. So yun I think hindi pa yan sigurado na.
Si Prof. Optimist eh.
Let's just say that suffice it to say, I think it's safe to say that Edwin Lacerda and Ronald Llamas will agree na hindi pa tapos ang laban. Okay. With that, maraming salamat po, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. And we'll have to have you back, Sir Edwin, for that conversation.
SIM card.
Pero election muna. Tapusin muna natin election. Okay. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat din.
Thank you very much.
That will be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao, and we are One News.